August 1991. Western Iraq. 200 kilometers behind enemy lines, deep inside territory held by Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard. A convoy of vehicles moves through the desert before dawn with no headlights. They are painted pink. Not camouflage pink. Not desert tan with a rose tint. Pink. Flat, matte, unmistakably pink, the color of faded strawberry ice cream baked out by 6 months of desert sun. Each vehicle is a Land Rover, a civilian truck sold to farmers and safari guides across the British countryside. No armor, no ballistic glass. The windscreen had been folded flat against the bonnet to stop moonlight glinting off the glass and giving away the convoy's position to the Iraqi observation post 3 kilometers north. Twin Vickers K machine guns sat on a paintal mount above the front seat, belts loaded, safety catches off. A Milan anti-tank missile launcher was lashed to the rear rack between spare jerrycans and enough plastic explosive to destroy a hardened aircraft shelter. The men driving these vehicles carried no military identification. If captured, they were officially civilians who had strayed across the Saudi border. 6 men, 6 pink Land Rovers, 200 kilometers inside Iraq, 11 days already behind the wire. Behind them, the largest coalition force assembled since World War II was preparing to cross into Kuwait. Here, in the dark, these men were hunting Scud mobile missile launchers with a truck a Surrey farmer would recognize from his local dealership. The Republican Guard they were hunting carried Soviet T-72 main battle tanks, BMP-2 infantry carriers, and ZSU-23-4 radar-guided anti-aircraft guns. On paper, a pink Land Rover with no armor should not be in the same war as any of those things. On paper, it was a joke. How did it end up 200 kilometers inside Iraq? Why did American debrief teams, after the war ended, request its full vehicle specifications be sent to Washington within 48 hours? And why, 30 years later, is the same vehicle being loaded onto transport aircraft and flown to Ukraine to fight the same Soviet tank doctrine it hunted in the desert in 1991? This is not one war, this is 3. Oman, 1972, the Falkland Islands, 1982, Iraq, 1991. 3 wars, 3 Soviet-equipped armies, 1 pink truck that was supposed to be a farm vehicle. To understand why the SAS chose the Land Rover, you need to understand the problem the British military faced in the late 1960s. The Special Air Service operated hundreds of kilometers ahead of conventional forces, in terrain with no roads and no reliable maps, with no resupply and no extraction if things went wrong. The vehicles of the conventional army were useless for this. Armored cars needed logistical chains the SAS could not carry. Helicopters could not fly the distances required and announce their presence to anyone within 5 kilometers. What was needed was a vehicle that could carry 8 men and their full combat load 1,500 kilometers without refueling, be maintained with hand tools by men who were not mechanics, cross wadis and lava fields that no road had touched, and be loaded onto a Hercules transport with 6 hours' notice. One vehicle met every requirement. The Land Rover Series 2A had been in production for 20 years by 1968. 4 wheels, ladder frame, leaf spring suspension. Every component sourceable from civilian suppliers in 28 countries. An SAS patrol in Oman could rebuild its own gearbox from a catalog available at any Land Rover dealer in Muscat. That was not an accident. That was the design. Marshals of Cambridge carried out the SAS conversion. Strip every non-essential component. Add fuel capacity for 1,200 kilometers of range. Mount the heaviest weapons the chassis could take. The result weighed 3,050 kilograms combat loaded. 4 auxiliary fuel tanks on the flanks and rear. Twin Vickers K guns on a forward pintle. a GPMG on the rear roll bar. From 1978, a Milan launcher capable of killing any tank the Soviet Union had ever exported, at ranges up to 1,973 meters. And the paint. The pink was not a joke, and it was not tradition. Long-range Desert Group veterans who had operated in North Africa during the war had studied the problem. At dawn and dusk in the Arabian desert, ambient light shifts into a rose spectrum. Conventional military greens stand out as dark silhouettes against the sky. Flat, chalky pink blends into the diffused light, rendering a vehicle invisible at ranges above 500 meters during the exact windows when patrols were most exposed. The SAS called it the Pink Panther. The name has never been officially acknowledged. It has never gone away. The first war was Oman, 1970. The Dhofar rebellion had been reorganized by the PFLOAG, a Marxist movement receiving weapons, training, and direction directly from the Soviet Union through South Yemen. Soviet AK-47s, Soviet RPG-7 launchers, Soviet DSHK heavy machine guns, Soviet trained instructors operating from bases across the Yemeni border. 22 SAS deployed to Dhofar in February 1971. The terrain was the Jebel Massif, a wall of rock rising 1,500 meters, cut by wadis, covered in monsoon vegetation so dense that a patrol 20 meters from a PFLOAG position might never see it. Conventional vehicles could not operate in the Jebel. The Pink Panthers could. In March 1972, a 4-vehicle patrol navigated the Wadi Darbat through terrain the Royal Engineers Survey Team had assessed as impassable for wheeled vehicles. The patrol reached a PFLOAG logistics depot the guerrillas considered unreachable. The depot contained 4 tons of Soviet ammunition, 12 DSHK machine guns in factory crates, and a Soviet communication set still in original packaging with Cyrillic instruction labels. The patrol destroyed the depot, captured the communications equipment, and extracted through the same route in darkness. 340 kilometers through the Jebel on 2 tanks of fuel. The PFLOAG security assessment afterward concluded the British must have had a second forward base they had not located. They were still searching for it when the war ended. The decisive operation came in October 1975. Pink Panthers carried the assault force onto the plateau at Sarfeh at night. Over ground, the PFLOAG had concluded no wheeled vehicle could reach. The position fell in 14 hours. The emergency was declared over on December 11, 1975. 2 SAS men killed in 4 years of operations. A Soviet-backed insurgency that had controlled 2/3 of the country when they arrived had ceased to exist. The Land Rovers were loaded back into the Hercules transports and flown to Hereford. If you are finding this account worth your time, hit subscribe now. It takes a second and it costs nothing, and it helps this channel keep producing this kind of deep dive. The Second War came 7 years later. April 1982. Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands. 22 SAS was among the first British forces in the water. On the night of May 14th, D Squadron landed on Pebble Island, where Argentina had established an air base used to launch ground attack aircraft against British ships. 45 men crossed 9 kilometers of open ground and destroyed 11 aircraft, a radar installation, an ammunition dump, and a fuel depot in 30 minutes, then extracted before the Argentine garrison could respond. The Land Rovers had carried the demolition charges and fire support weapons across ground the garrison had concluded no vehicle could cross. At Port Stanley, as the British advance converged in late June, SAS patrols and Land Rovers had already penetrated the Argentine defensive perimeter and were operating inside the town itself, marking artillery targets and cutting communications lines. When Argentina surrendered on June 14th, SAS Land Rovers were among the first British vehicles photographed inside Port Stanley. Not a single vehicle lost to enemy action. The third war was the one the whole world watched. January 1991. G Squadron and D Squadron crossed the Saudi border into western Iraq in 8 modified Land Rover 110 Defenders, still painted flat pink. Each vehicle carried 14 days of rations, 500 liters of fuel in auxiliary tanks, a Milan launcher, twin Vickers K guns, a .50 caliber Browning on the rear mount, and a burst transmission satellite communication system. The mission was SCUD mobile missile launchers operating in the Al-Anbar Desert west of Baghdad. SCUDs with chemical or biological warheads were the coalition's most feared single threat. They moved at night and hid under motorway bridges by day. Only ground patrols could find them. The SAS was the only force in the coalition with the training and vehicles to operate 200 kilometers inside Iraq with no air support and no realistic extraction option. On the night of January 22nd, a patrol located its first target, a SCUD convoy moving west on an unmapped desert track. One Soviet-built MS-54 3-launcher vehicle, 2 support trucks, one ZSU-23-4 in escort. The Milan operator acquired the launcher from 1,100 meters. 2 missiles hit the launcher in rapid succession. The detonation was visible 20 kilometers away. The patrol drove south at 110 kilometers per hour and disappeared into a wadi the Iraqi command later assessed as impassable for wheeled vehicles. Over the following 5 weeks, SAS Land Rover patrols destroyed or directed airstrikes onto 26 SCUD launchers, cut fiber optic communications cables linking Baghdad to the Western missile network, and engaged 17 Iraqi military convoys. 3 T-72 main battle tanks were destroyed by SAS Milan teams during the campaign, including a confirmed kill documented in the post-operation intelligence assessment submitted to CENTCOM in Riyadh. A 3-ton pink civilian truck with no armor had just killed a 44-ton Soviet main battle tank designed to stop NATO's best armor on the North German plain. On paper, the Land Rover should have been dead within hours of crossing the border. A single burst from an Iraqi GPMG at 400 meters would have killed the crew before they could identify the source. The T-72 could have destroyed the entire patrol with 1 round from visual range. None of it mattered. It did not matter because the Land Rover's doctrine made those advantages irrelevant before the engagement began. The SAS did not fight from fixed positions. It struck first, from unexpected range, in unexpected direction, across terrain the enemy had assessed as impassable, and then drove away at 100 kilometers per hour before a response force could be assembled. By the time an Iraqi quick reaction element reached the contact point, the vehicles were 60 kilometers away on a different heading. Speed and range replaced armor. Surprise replaced firepower parity. The same farm truck had done exactly this in 3 separate theaters against 3 separate armies over 20 years. The Land Rover continued to evolve. The Jackal variant introduced in the 2000s carried the same fundamental concept into Afghanistan and Iraq, operating across the same terrain denial doctrine the original Pink Panthers had used in the Jebel Dhofar. In November 2023, the British Ministry of Defense approved the transfer of current Jackal variants to Ukrainian Special Operations Forces for Operations in eastern Ukraine against Russian T-72, B-3, and T-90 tanks, the direct descendants of the same Soviet armored program the Pink Panthers had hunted in the Al-Anbar in 1991. The vehicle that was laughed at the first time anyone outside Hereford saw it was being requested, by name, by soldiers fighting the same tank doctrine it had first engaged more than 50 years earlier. Original Pink Panther Land Rover Series 2. A vehicles survive at the Imperial War Museum in London and the Tank Museum in Bovington. The vehicle is immediately recognizable. Farm truck chassis, no armor, pink paint, Vickers guns on the pintle. It looks like a joke. The Soviets who designed the armies it fought spent decades and billions building vehicles meant to make things like it impossible. Those vehicles are in museums. The pink truck is being loaded onto another aircraft right now.